Welcome everyone, and thank you for watching the midterm presentation for Impact 2045, a Priority Climate Action Plan for New Haven County. My name is Dan Deutsch, and I am one of 10 UMass Amherst Master of Regional Planning students excited to share with you the work we have embarked on as part of the Fall 2023 studio course with the support of Professor Camille Bargers. We'd like to begin by taking a moment to acknowledge that the University of Massachusetts Amherst was founded and built on the unceded homelands of the Pocumtuck Nation on the land of the Norwottuck community. In addition, we honor that Connecticut, the region of our project focus, is land that the Eastern Pequot, Mashantucket Pequot, Golden Hill Pocusset, Niantic, Mohegan, Schaghticoke, and Algonquin-speaking peoples, including the Quinnipiac, have lived on and cared for generations, and continue to do so. As we acknowledge that we stand on native land, it's important to reflect on the historical forces that led to its being occupied primarily by non-native people, because this has something to say about our responsibility as planners and the inequities we're charged with addressing when we're planning for climate change. White settlers constructed an idea of native inferiority to justify taking it, and imposed a concept of private property that was foreign to native peoples. Western colonialism led to massive dispossessions across the globe, and, with the Industrial Revolution and all that followed, it also led directly to climate change, which is now leading to further displacement, and the dynamics remain the same. Wealthy countries have been the primary drivers of climate change, while the Global South, indigenous communities, low-income communities, and communities of color suffer the most from its effects. As planners, we are very much bound up in the private property view of land use and continued historical inequities. Whatever its intentions, planning has often worsened these inequities. It has led to low income and communities of color being bisected by highways, exposed to environmental hazards, and to displacement caused by gentrification. Whenever we plan, we are at risk of repeating those injustices. It's our responsibility as planners to instead prevent and correct these injustices. That can only be done by working with historically disadvantaged groups as full partners in planning with respect, openness, and real accountability. These reflections speak to the project we presented on, which is a regional greenhouse gas reduction plan with a focus on equity at its center. Over the next 30 minutes, my classmates Janelle Franklin, Emily Hodis, and I will walk you through the work that we're doing with our client, the South Central Regional Council of Governments, as part of a federally funded climate action plan. As I said earlier, we're part of the Regional Planning Studio 2023, but we're not just a group of students handing in a class project at the end of the semester. We are, in fact, planners in training, highly concerned about the impacts of climate change on local, regional, national, and global levels. I'd like to formally welcome our client, the South Central Regional Council of Governments, who hired us. Ben Lovejoy and Stephanie Camp are here today representing the South Central Regional Council of Governments, or SCR-COG. They're also both alumni of this program, and we know that their own work in the Regional Planning Studio has set very high expectations for this project. The SCR-COG is the lead regional agency for this project, with support from the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments. Our region, the New Haven-Milford Metropolitan Statistical Area, comprises 27 municipalities that are represented by these two organizations. This region is a dynamic area with a diversity of towns and people that each have their economic, social, and political context. So as planners, as regional planners, it's our goal to capture this entire context in our planning. We would also like to welcome our partners, the UMass Center for Resilient Metro Regions and the UMass Amherst Department of Civil Engineering. Dr. Jimmy Oki and Peo Zhao of the Networks for Accessibility, Resilience, and Sustainability Laboratory are carrying out some very innovative work on greenhouse gas inventories, and we are excited to work alongside them in this project. SCR-COG has contracted our program to do the research and writing of a climate action plan to fulfill the requirements of a $1 million climate pollution reduction grant. The Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program is an outgrowth of the Biden-Harris administration's Inflation Reduction Act to fund state and metropolitan areas to create plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions with focus on equity. It's a multi-year program, and our piece is the first phase. So a quick story on the name, Impact 2045. It actually came to me in a dream. It was an anxiety dream about this class, but so I just woke up one morning a few weeks ago at 5:20 a.m. with this epiphanic image of Impact 2045 in my head, and I just had to get it down. So I wrote it on our class brainstorming document, but fortunately for you all, this is not on view in our gallery back there. But you know, in all seriousness, aside from the fact that we could fit the letters CT in a cool action word, the work we're doing today is going to have impacts on over the next 20 years at least. And we intend to deliver a plan that can withstand the tests of an uncertain future. So the piece our studio is working on is the Priority Climate Action Plan, or the PCAP. And that's going to set high-level priorities that will be further developed in the next phase, which is a Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, or CCAP. You'll be hearing these terms throughout the presentation. Again, the Priority Climate Action Plan, PCAP, Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, the CCAP, that comes later. And then our final deliverable within our project is the status report due in July 2027. So what are the elements of a Priority Climate Action Plan? The Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program requires that it must contain a greenhouse gas inventory, a benefits analysis for low-income and disadvantaged communities, quantified reduction measures, and a review of authority to implement. So let's expand on some of these requirements. Many municipal and state climate action plans focus on both climate change and adaptation strategies, or climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies. This grant asks us to focus on mitigation strategies, though adaptation may show up as co-benefits of these strategies. Essentially, co-benefits are all other positive outcomes of greenhouse gas reduction. Adaptation measures are defined as actions that prepare us to deal with the impacts of climate change, while mitigation measures aim to reduce the impacts that human activities have on the planet. Examples of mitigation strategies include transitioning the electricity and transportation sectors towards renewable energy, efficiency upgrades, and increased carbon sinks that capture and store greenhouse gases. Our plan will focus on ways to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases in the region and other air pollutants related to these emitters, understanding the environmental, social, and economic burdens they face. The Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program that is funding our PCAP is part of the Biden-Harris administration's Justice 40 initiative, which requires that 40% of the benefits of its programs must flow through low-income and disadvantaged communities, or LIDACs, the term used in the grant guidelines. As I mentioned earlier, communities of color, low-income communities, and historically disadvantaged communities, while contributing the least to climate change, are at highest risk from its hazards, such as urban heat island effect, heat and air pollutant-related illnesses, and housing damage and loss due to flooding and storms. That is why a benefits analysis that is focused on the needs and insights of people from low-income and disadvantaged communities is central to our work. So we just discussed the basic requirements of this grant, but we're not stopping there. There is more. In order to make a plan that is resilient to changes outside of our control and to ensure we are approaching LIDAC and other community needs in a way that is locally relevant, we are going to go beyond the grant requirements to create what we're calling a PCAP Plus plan. We'll talk more about what that means in a second. But after a lot of discussion about our values and vision for the project, we crafted a mission statement that we believe reflects the core purpose of the project. So we're really focused on creating pathways to an equitable climate future and to improving the quality of life for all in our project region. So what do we mean by a PCAP Plus? The PCAP Plus is our way of going beyond the requirements of a priority climate action plan to make a more resilient, equitable outcome that speaks to local needs so that our plan will be useful for years to come. We believe that the best way to ensure that is through purposeful community engagement and making sure that the plan is adaptable. This includes 3 areas of work we'll be talking about further in a moment. First, an expanded view of LIDACs in our project region, which will start using the grant-required mapping tools from the EPA and Justice 40, which are very good, but but which will go beyond this analysis to include some factors not considered by those tools in analyzing inequities. Our second PCAP Plus focus is a public engagement strategy for the CCAP phase that is based on the belief that stakeholders from each community have ideas and local knowledge that are crucial to creating a successful plan. That's why it's essential to create the channels of communication and strong community partnerships for these ideas to flow. And this is especially important for low income and disadvantaged communities to make sure that we're creating a plan that truly benefits them and is accountable to them. Finally, our PCAP Plus will provide robust mitigation measures, which means crafting strategies that are resilient and flexible enough to stand up under unexpected events and trends. Before we get to all the other aspects of our plan, we want to talk about how we're approaching this piece, because it's the framework for our entire planning process. And for that, I'm going to pass it off to Janelle.
Thank you, Dan, for that introduction. So how do we make a greenhouse gas mitigation plan that's resilient over time? Well, you do this by going through a process called scenario planning. As planners, we know that unpredictable events can have a huge impact on every aspect of planning, implementation, and how our interventions function in real life. Scenario planning attempts to think through the what ifs and create a plan that can still function if some big event happens or something we were counting on falls through. Scenario planning is a particularly good approach for this project for a couple of reasons. For one, because we can't decarbonize entire sector overnight, we are looking at medium to long timescale. In addition, climate change itself is creating a future full of uncertainties. And while scientists are highly confident of their overall predictions, a large amount of uncertainty exists about when and how it will affect us. We also know that big economic shifts, conflict, natural disasters, and political change will happen. But we don't know when it will happen or the magnitude of its effect. For example, the current administration has the political will to fund the big changes to the electrical grid that will be needed for a future of renewable energy sources. But we need to create a plan that can still work if that funding dries up. Too often as planners, we assume that the future will be like the present, but that's just not true. As a result, the resiliency of our community suffered. On the other hand, uncertainty, especially the uncertainty of climate change, can fill us with anxiety, which can feel paralyzing. But we don't have to be stuck with dread or with static plans that assume predictability. Scenario planning gives us a chance to prepare for a number of possible futures by constructively embracing uncertainty as our fundamental reality. So how do we do this? We are following Advent steps for scenario planning. First, we look at the key trends, constraints, values, and issues. We did this by reviewing existing climate policies in Connecticut, literature on climate equity, and the most recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's report for North America. Next, we identified external forces most likely to have big impacts on our plan over the next 20 years. We are in the process of this final phase, building scenarios, which will guide us to creating a plan resilient to these possible futures. To choose our driving forces, we brainstormed various external forces that could affect our plan over the next 20 years. So we did this, you can see our process here on this board. On the left side, we have low certainty, and then moving towards the right, we have high certainty, and then on the bottom, we've got low impact and high impact. You can see a lot of the driving forces that we identified were categorizing as high impact and high certainty. And the 7 that we identified as like our most important driving forces are climate change hazards, demographic shifts, energy production and technology shifts, legislation and funding, public opinion, economic shifts, and catastrophic events. So by combining these drivers and seeing how they interact with each other, we've already started to identify some potential scenarios. And through that, we've got some themes that we're looking at already, which is one is home ownership remains difficult for younger generations. Another one is grid transition and resiliency on fossil fuels, or resilience on fossil fuels. And the third is this idea that New Haven becomes a transit hub. Now that we've given you a sense of how we're using scenario planning as our framework, Let's get back to the big pieces of the CPRG grant requirements, starting with the first thing we need to know, a greenhouse gas inventory, which tells us where the carbon and other greenhouses are coming from in our region. So, where is the carbon coming from? In order to identify this, we are using a greenhouse gas inventory, which is a sector-wide analysis of greenhouse gas sources. It tells us which human activities are contributing the most to climate change. It can be one at different scales from global to regional. It gives us the big picture of what buckets of strategies we need to be focusing on to make the biggest reductions in emissions. For example, in this slide, the Connecticut Department of Energy and the Environmental Protection's greenhouse gas inventory shows us that transportation contributes more to emissions than any other sector in the state. So transportation is here at 40%. This tells us that strategies to reduce transportation emissions will need to be a big part of our plan, whether that means better public transit, electric vehicle adoption, or a combination of the two. Residential energy use is the second biggest sector. So we know that insulation and energy efficient heating, cooling, and appliances could make a big impact. As part of this grant, to get a better sense of greenhouse gas emissions at the level of our region, Dr. Oki and Peya Zhao from NARS Lab from UMass's Civil Engineering Department have been doing a region-specific analysis of our greenhouse gases for 3 metropolitan statistical areas, or MSAs, in Connecticut. Their primary work has produced an initial inventory for our region, the New Haven-Milford MSA, which you can see on the right. And as you can see, they're very similar in their emissions, except for 2 sectors. We've got in Connecticut, electric power consumption is 15%, whereas in our MSA it's at 9%. And for Connecticut as a whole, industrial is at 8%, whereas in our MSA it's at 13%. So, and their work will actually be very helpful for our LIHAC benefits analysis as well. And so, like greenhouse gas emissions, like the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, the first step of our LIHAC benefits analysis begins with some hard data, which we will use to understand the environmental, social, and economic burdens they face and to map where they are located within the New Haven-Milford MSA. In the CCAP phase, it will include partnering with LIHAC communities to define the details of these plans. For the PCAP phase, which we're in now, to assess environmental burdens, we are relying on sources like the Equity and Environmental Justice Working Group report from Connecticut's Climate Action Plan. Any insights we gain from this survey, initial conversations with community officials and leaders, and data from some powerful mapping tools. Let's talk about those tools and how we're using them. The CPRG grant recommends that we use 2 mapping tools to do this. One is the CJS tool, and the other is the Environmental Justice Screening tool, or the EJ screen. So this is the CJS tool. This was created to identify low-income and disadvantaged communities on a census tract level for the Justice 40 initiative. It maps communities that meet a threshold for low-income population that are in the 90th percentile for at least one environmental, social, or economic burden. So the burdens can be seen here on the right, which are climate change, energy, health, housing, legacy pollution, transportation, water and wastewater, and then workforce development is also included. Each broad category has specific indicators within it, like flood risk, exposure to particulate air pollution, asthma rates, lead paint, proximity to a hazardous waste facility, transportation barriers, and having less than a high school diploma. Federally recognized tribal areas are automatically considered LIDACs by the CJS tool. While only CJS is required for the grant, we are also using the Environmental Justice Screen tool, or the EJ screen. So this is a snapshot of the EJ screen tool. This is used by the EPA to identify communities disproportionately affected by environmental burdens on a block group level, which is smaller than the CJS. Indicators include income, race, and environmental factors such as cancer risk from air toxins, as well as additional factors such as limited English speaking and low life expectancy. A benefit of using both tools is that while CGIS operates at the census tract level, EJ Screen captures smaller census block groups, and thus can identify LIDAC communities in non-LIDAC tracts that the CGIS might not pick up. So on this map here, you can see the LIDAC tracts identified in this light green in our MSA area. But then here in this expanded view of LIDACs, we have the LIDAC block groups identified in dark green. So it's just showing how this additional tool is allowing us to get a better, more comprehensive look at where LIDAC communities lie in our area. As part of our PCAP Plus approach, which includes an expanded understanding of where low-income and disadvantaged groups live in the region and the barriers they face, we plan to adjust the parameters of these tools to capture levels of certain burdens that are high but below the 90% threshold these tools are set at. We are also looking at incorporating a new environmental justice mapping tool created by UConn as part of Connecticut's Climate Action Plan. It contains an expanded list of variables and takes into account more locally specific factors. We may also use public health maps of disease burdens to further understand the needs and vulnerabilities of communities in our region. This is just a screenshot of UConn's EJ map. Knowing where the LIDACs are and the burdens they face are the first steps in our LIDAC benefits analysis. The Climate Pollution Reduction Grant also requires us to identify direct and indirect benefits for these communities that will result from our greenhouse gas mitigation strategies. The grant defines direct benefits as reduced risk of climate change hazards that result from reducing greenhouse gas emissions. As part of our global effort to reduce greenhouse gases, our plan's emissions reductions will lower risks such as extreme heat, flooding, and severe storms, which LIDACs are often particularly vulnerable to. Another direct benefit is reducing air pollution overall. We are also looking at co-benefits such as reduced asthma symptoms, less noise pollution, lower heating and electricity costs, better public transportation options, and community capacity building. So this is an example of a LIDAC benefits analysis process that we went through. In this example, we're using an increase of electric vehicles as our measure. So the direct benefits would be reducing local air pollution, which is good. And then our co-benefits are reducing illness related to local pollution, which is also good. But then we're recognizing that a negative impact could be that electric vehicles are not as affordable to people living in low-income disadvantaged communities. So if we're recommending this policy and our Justice 40 initiative is saying that we want benefits to flow through these communities, then we're going to have to address that in our policy and ensure that LIDACs are receiving benefits still with that policy. Which brings us to our quantified reduction measures and our robust mitigation strategies. And with that, I will pass this off to Emily now. Thank you, Emily.
So I do want to pause for a minute. This is a lot of information to take in right now. So we've got, it's this lots of acronyms. It's a little bit of an alphabet soup. For some of you, you're really familiar with the terminology, but other people, this is new information. So I'm going to take us through a few other aspects of this project, and then we're actually going to flip the story, and you get to have a chance to be on the mic if you wanted to ask questions or to share any comments. So I'm going to talk about, and you've seen this slide before, so you see we're taking you through a progression of things. So I'm going to give a little bit more information on what this means, quantitative reduction measures and robust mitigation strategies. So we were, with our clients, we were given a slew of climate action plans to look through. And on top of that, and maybe this is part of our PCAP plus for ourselves internally, we actually found even more plans to look at. So they included plans that were specific to Connecticut, all the way from Maine, Minnesota, North Carolina. And what we did was we reviewed all of these plans. We really took, it was probably 4 stages of reviewing these plans. And we adopted a coding analysis because each of the plans had a lot of different but similar information. And we actually adopted our very own Dr. Elizabeth Infield's quality plan coding analysis that some of the students had learned in another course of hers. So we're a little love affair here at UMass Amherst. And we looked at, and let me just show you the next slide, because you can really see. So looking at the inside, you can see like these were the main takeaways of each of these, and you can see not just the formatting, well, you can't see the content of it, but you can tell if you look at the back, we have some diagrams about it, but you can see we really had to dissect to find what were commonalities, what were differences between those. And some of the things that we looked at in particular, and especially looking at different sectors, was looking at what were associated actions, where were authority to implement for different communities, and some of the co-benefits that we could see in these, as well as associated policies and programs. So this is actually some of the students in action here. And some of what we discovered we needed to do was actually to filter out information. So some of the things we found were a little thin, I guess you could say, where there were goals, but they didn't seem that they had any actions connected to them. So it was great ideas, but not necessarily actionable ideas. So we kind of threw those away. And then we looked at anything that had adaptation strategies was also not relevant because this project is mitigation focused. And then we looked at combining, and this was where the coding really came in nicely, was combining strategies that have similar reduction measures. And then the last thing was really highlighting strategies that we thought best fit specifically for the New Haven region. Some of the things that really stood out, and Janelle spoke about this a little bit, but I know it's a lot of information. So there were a few things that were some of the standouts. One of them was around energy efficiency in buildings. One example of that might be partnering with public housing authorities to implement net zero and passive building strategies. And then transportation is another biggie. So if you remember the pie chart, transportation was the largest sector that's impacted. So that could be something like looking at other ways, multimodal ways of developing transit. And then a third part of this, which I think especially for urban areas is really relevant, is looking at sustainable green space development. So that might be something like looking at a public way that could be redeveloped as a green space. So this is also a little bit similar. So here we are, we're digging into the plans, and then we're beginning to look at this from the scenario planning perspective. So it's a little bit overlapping with what Janelle spoke about, but it's worth looking at it from a little bit of a different lens here too, is here we're setting this goal of, let's say the goal is reduce emissions related to residential heating by 85% by 2045. And so we started developing several different scenarios that may be linked to that result. Some of these, I do want to say, some of that you can also find in the gallery if you didn't get a chance to see that before. So here we are back at our panel to organize ourselves, and we're going to now, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about public engagement, which is a really important piece of this project. And in the PCAP phase for public engagement, we're really just setting the groundwork, we're setting the foundation for what's actually going to be implemented more robustly in the CCAP phase. So if you remember from what Dan had showed with that chart, we've got PCAP that's happening this year with Studio 2023, and then CCAP will begin, and that's going to actually be the next year's studio. Who's here who's in the next MRP class for next year? Okay, so it's good you're here because now you kind of know what you're getting in for. So we're really just planting the groundwork for what will then be mostly actualized in the next phase. And public involvement is really essential for making successful plans. And I want to talk a little bit about, why public engagement, why this is such a crucial piece of things. First of all, public engagement, part of it is about seeking input from other people, And then there's another piece that's about sharing information. And then there's another piece that becomes even more crucial is really enrolling people to join the cause. So there may be some people in the community who don't have so much investment or familiarity with climate change or climate, thinking that it's such a big global issue. It's not really my issue. I've got a lot more important things to deal with in my life. So the idea is that in educating people and connecting with people, then they're going to see like, oh, wow, this is really related to me. This is really relevant to my life in some way. And it also, because of that combination and that relationship building, it actually provides a foundation for a more effective plan. So there's a piece of this that we actually have been digging into as a class that really spoke to us. I think a lot of us know a lot about public engagement. It's not rocket science. But there was a piece that really stood out to us that was from the Equity Environmental Justice Working Group. It was in a report that we read. It was a climate action report that we read. And one of the things that really stood out was the importance of creating an advisory board or a way to really organize specifically with LIDAC community that will allow people not just to be informed, but to be active participants and to be part of decision making, and the importance of really adopting that and creating that at an early stage of a plan. And it was one of those, again, kind of obvious but aha moments for us of, wow, this is really important to put this front and center. So in terms of what we're doing in the first phase in PCAP Plus, we're going to be, and in fact, we're already in the process of it, not just going to be, but we are in it. It's really building the strategy. And right now, we're just ready to launch our website. Probably you saw the website in the back, but for those of you who are on Zoom, you may not have seen that yet. And we are also creating a survey. We're in our first test round with it right now. And I'm going to be talking about both those things in more detail in a moment. And then our clients are a little bit ahead of us because they already started doing some tabling events at farmers markets and other community gatherings. So we're going to be hopping on board with them. Right now, they have a very modest, short survey that we've already, with our first round of design, have already expanded on in our survey. And then we will also begin meeting with key stakeholders. So one example of people who we may be reaching out to meet with could be superintendents of schools or people who are involved in with housing authorities, because we're thinking about the fact that if you look at residential and industrial building, that's a huge makeup of the impact in this particular region. And those are important players who could really adopt change in looking at what's happening in with shifts in how buildings are either built, or it could be even in retrofitting existing buildings. And then the last piece that I will say on what we're up to right now for this semester is we're going to be facilitating 2 different community activity events for UMass students, so that we'll do some test runs before that then gets integrated into the CCAP phase. And then for the CCAP phase, a lot of what's going to be happening is distributing and further developing the survey and website. I was actually talking with Stephanie the other week, and we were talking about how the website really is, it's going to be a living thing that's going to keep carrying on through the entirety of this project. And the survey also will have an opportunity between the PCAP and the CCAP stage to revisit and see how are the responses going with the survey. Might there be some needs to make some shifts for the survey to make it either speak better to the communities that are filling in the survey, or that we're actually collecting information in a way that will be more effective for the plans. So we also will be continuing to engage with key stakeholders, and this will be the time with the building of an actual advisory board And then there might be other strategies like utilizing media, and whether it's social media, newspapers, and so forth, to get the word out and to engage people in the community. And the website is nearly up and running. Right now, it's what the public sees is a little bit of a skeleton of things, but we're really very close to fully launching the website. And that will include general information that we will be updating, links to the survey, ways to get involved, and a calendar of events. And I think part of the importance of the website is it really gives people a place to go to for a lot of different pieces of information. And we're designing it in a way that makes it very user-friendly for both community members and as well as professionals and partnering organizations. And the survey is, as I said, we have the first draft of the survey now. It will be accessible by web as well as mobile. And it's designed in a way to really speak to and collect information from people who are living and working in the New Haven, Milford metropolitan statistical area. And the way that we have designed the questions is framed so that, again, it's really user-friendly, and that we're asking questions in a way that isn't, do you believe in, something like, do you believe in climate change? Or that it's very technical. It's really questions that allow us to collect the information we're looking for of how are they feeling impacted right now, without even knowing this may have to do with climate change, as well as things that they would like to see happen in their communities. So this is an example where it says, what are some weather and heat related changes you have noticed in your lifetime? Check all that apply. So they may check, well, it's hotter summers, that's what I noticed. Warmer winters, I noticed that too. And the sea level is higher. So it gives people a really accessible way to answer questions. And this is another example where it says, rank item by how much you would prefer to use the project implemented in your community. So again, this is like digging in a little deeper. Some people may not have thought of these things before, and other people will have very strong opinions before they even took the survey. So we are especially wanting to utilize the surveys, reaching out to LIDACs. And that will happen through tabling events, linking to the website, and there are plans to have volunteers, other community organizations involved in collecting, just kind of disseminating the survey. So it may even be organizations that aren't climate focused, that we know there are lots of community members there who will have an opinion and definitely are having impact from climate change. So the last piece of this that I wanted to comment on briefly is the authority to implement. And because the COG, as all COGs are in this region, Council of Governments. So it's for those of you who don't know, so councils of governments are really, it is a group that oversees and connects with a whole bunch of municipalities in an area. So COGs themselves actually don't have a lot of authority to implement, but they have a lot of influence to implement. So our client really is there in the role of being a conduit between the municipalities and on a statewide level. So also involved in COGs on their committees and on their boards are often mayors or other leaders of municipalities who can bring back policies and ideas to their own communities. So, and for this grant, this particular grant, there are actually cities that have also applied for this grant, and they get to play with a lot more than our client does. So, so coming back full circle, or full circles, the climate pollution reduction grant. So this is really our full timeline. And I know Dan spoke about it a little bit, But I do want to emphasize that the places where UMass Amherst fits into this picture are really for this December. Studio 23 will have our final products, including December 6th, when we'll have our final presentation. We'll hope you return for that. And then there's going to be this time in between where there will be some behind the scenes things happening, even within UMass. And the clients will be preparing for the next stage of the CCAP stage, which the students who are here will be, the baton will be handed off to them to take on the next phase of the project. And then the clients will then take the results of that stage of the project, finalize things, and submit final reports to the EPA. So the fact is, though, there's still a lot of work to do this semester. And as tired as we may feel of getting to this midterm point, it was a heavy lift over the last couple of weeks in particular. And I will just say, we've had a mad dash from the beginning of the semester. And Ben and Stephanie have very high hopes and very high expectations, and we want to meet those. So we want to just let you know some of the steps that we're recognizing we still have to complete between now and the middle of December. So we're going to be finalizing mitigation strategies and integrating LIDAC benefits analysis. And we'll also be building out all of the public engagement strategies. And we'll be doing some of those site visits with key stakeholders. We're also, I will want to add into that, we're going to be touring around some of the towns and the communities also, so that we can get a sense of what it is, what it feels like on the inside, looking at some of the neighborhoods and so forth. And one piece we didn't really comment on prior to this is establishing interagency collaboration framework. So there are other in Connecticut, there are actually other organizations that are working on the same grant. There's going to be information sharing and support between these different granting groups, because as you know, even though there's this one region, the regions link to other regions. So there's a benefit in information sharing between those who are also working on similar grant projects. And then last but not least, we really shouldn't say begin and complete, because we've already begun, but it's really complete PCAP deliverables. So I want to thank you all on behalf of Dan and Janelle and myself. We first want to thank all of our classmates. We get to be the front people for this, but this was a heavy lift to make all of this happen at this point. We know we still have a lot of work ahead of us by the end of the semester. But it's not just the presentation, it's really all of the work that goes into this. And we are students and we are planners in training, as Dan said, and we are very committed to living up to the expectations of our clients. I want to thank Camille as well as Tatum Thomas, who is the PA for the class, for supporting us so much in this process. Jim and Pao, who were not able to be here today, for providing amazing research. It's awesome to have this collaboration across campus. It doesn't get to happen as often as we would like, and it's just great to have that powerhouse there. And I know that's part of the reason why we became clients. And I also want to thank Ben and Stephanie for entrusting us to build an awesome powerhouse plan. And then finally, I want to thank all of you for being here, professors, friends, and maybe a few family members, and people who are here via Zoom, and to gain a sense of what we're up to, and maybe why we're a little bit late on some of our other assignments. So with that, we've got our lovely QR code to do the survey if you want to do a test run of the survey. And I'm now going to turn it over to Joe Mega, who is going to facilitate the Q&A session. So thank you.